All right, hi everybody. Professor Jeff here with another walkthrough, talk through, me reading and talking about material from Professor Dana Ferris's textbook, Language Power. So today we're going to focus on tutorial 3. This is about phrases, clauses, and sentence types. So let's just jump in. We're starting here on page 41. So please follow along with your own book, follow along on the screen, whatever is best for you. So, phrases, clauses, and sentence types. Did you ever learn how to diagram sentences in earlier English classes? Most writers do not find this very exciting. However, a basic understanding of how sentences are put together is critical, means very important, for accurate and effective communication. Better awareness of sentence parts and types of sentences can help you avoid run-ons and fragments, use commas, and semicolons correctly, reduce wordiness, vary, that just means change, your sentence types, and connect your ideas clearly. So just like she always does, Professor Ferris has some questions for us to think about at the beginning of the tutorial. First, what is a phrase? What different types of phrases are there? And how do they function within sentences? Next, what are the characteristics of dependent and independent clauses? How do both types of clauses influence sentence structure and punctuation choices? She gives us the pages here, like always. What different types of sentences are there, and how can I form them accurately? And how do I use sentence elements, that's phrases and clauses, and sentence types in my own writing? So things to think about and preparing you a preview of what will come and what we will look at in this tutorial. All right, so on page 42, she's got a discover activity. You can pause the video here and do this on your own if you would like. I'm going to just read through it and give you some ideas for how to use this activity to learn more about your own writing process. So it says discover. This exercise will help you see what you already know about different sentence structures. The first paragraph is from a short story called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge by American author Ambrose Bierce, who lived from 1842 to 1914. So already a clue, right? This language is old, over 100 years old now. So the second is a paraphrase of the first. Examine the two and answer the questions that follow. Now, I'm sure at this level everybody already knows, but of course paraphrase means same meaning, different words, right? So if you're trying to paraphrase something that you read or that you saw, you're going to take those same ideas, put them in your own words, but keep the meaning the same. So that's what we're looking at here. So here's the original. A man stood upon a railroad bridge in northern Alabama, looking down into the swift water 20 feet below. The man's hands were behind his back, the wrists bound with a cord. A rope closely encircled his neck. It was attached to a stout cross timber above his head, and the slack fell to the level of his knees. Some loose boards laid upon the sleepers supporting the metals of the railway supplied a footing for him and his executioners, 2 private soldiers of the Federal Army, directed by a sergeant, who in civil life may have been a deputy sheriff. At a short remove upon the same temporary platform was an officer in the uniform of his rank, armed. He was a captain. A sentinel at each end of the bridge stood with his rifle in the position known as support, that is to say, vertical in front of the left shoulder, the hammer resting on the forearm thrown straight across the chest, a formal and unnatural position, enforcing an erect carriage of the body. It did not appear to be the duty of these 2 men to know what was occurring at the center of the bridge. They merely blockaded the 2 ends of the foot planking that traversed it. And here's the paraphrase. A man was standing on a railroad bridge in northern Alabama and looking down into the river. His hands were tied behind his back and a rope was around his neck. The end of the rope was tied to part of the wooden bridge above his head, and the loose middle part hung to his knees. There were some boards across the rail ties. The man was standing on them, and so were the men who were going to execute him. 2 privates from the Northern Army and their sergeant, who was probably a deputy sheriff before the war. A short distance away stood their captain. 2 soldiers, holding rifles in a formal way, guarded each end of the bridge. They were not paying attention to what was happening on the bridge itself. The two guards at each end of the bridge faced the banks of the river. None of the soldiers moved. Then here, Professor Ferris asks you to think about, in a few sentences, answer the following questions. Refer to the texts specifically in your answers. So 1, which of the two versions is easier to understand? Why? 2, which is more enjoyable to read? Why? And 3, what do you notice about the sentence structure in the two text samples? Describe the difference. Now, don't worry if you don't know the technical terms to describe the sentences. Just describe your own observations as clearly as you can. And I'll just add to that, how do they feel different? Even if you can't say, oh, this one has significantly more adjective clauses. Okay, if you don't know what that is yet, that's fine. But can you describe what the difference is? How do the sentences feel different in these two examples? So think about that. We'll talk about this later on, of course, and you'll get to practice some of this in our lessons. But for now, we're just reading through the text. Great. So now that you've thought about the Discover activity, we're going to continue here on page 44. So we are starting with phrases, recognizing phrases. So a phrase is a related group of words that forms a recognizable unit of meaning within a sentence. Take the following sentence, for example. The little boy ran quickly through the park. Now, in this sentence, the little boy is the subject noun phrase. Ran quickly through the park is the verb phrase. Through the park is a prepositional phrase that is inside the larger verb phrase. Finally, within the prepositional phrase is a smaller noun phrase, the park, which serves as the object of the preposition through. Now, again, when we talked about parts of speech, we said one way to identify a noun is to ask yourself if it comes after a preposition, because if it is, it's probably the object of that preposition. So remember, a prepositional phrase then needs a preposition and a noun phrase together, right? And this is really what this chapter is all about, is how to see the different types of phrases, how they come together. And just as Professor Ferris says here, sometimes, very often, you have phrases that kind of live inside of other phrases, which live in even bigger phrases, right? And you start to see how these things add up together to create, clauses and sentences. So when we look at these phrases separately, we can see how each is related to a group of words that can answer a question. So here's, just like she always does, she's got a sort of chart, a graph for us to help understand this. So we've got type of phrase in this column, an example from the sentence above, and then the question that it answers. So the subject noun phrase answers who, and in this case it's the little boy. The verb phrase answers the question did what, and the example is ran quickly through the park. This prepositional phrase answers the question where, through the park, and the noun phrase, which is the object of the preposition, answers through where, the park. Now, look at the same sentence in a different way. The little boy ran quickly through the park. The little boy ran quickly through the park. And here she's highlighting little boy ran and quickly through the. Consider the highlighted words. So little boy ran quickly through the. They are next to one another within the sentence, but that doesn't make them a meaningful unit. In the first example, it wouldn't make sense to separate little boy from its article the, or to separate the verb ran from the rest of its verb phrase. The second example makes this even clearer. Quickly through the makes no sense on its own as a phrase. So on page 45, we get some practice. And if that idea doesn't make sense to you, go back, rewind the video, go slowly, right? This is only one page, but there's some important ideas in there, so make sure that this makes sense over here on 44. 45 is practice, so I'm going to read it, and then you can pause and try to do it on your own. So practice 1 says, before we go on, let's check your understanding of the definition of phrase. For each of the following sentences, if the boldface material, and boldface is this, right, this sort of darker words and letters, is a phrase, write the word phrase after the sentence. So, number 1, I gave it to the woman who is sitting over there, to the woman. She went very quietly into the house. She went very. The sad, lonely old man wandered through the park. Wandered through the park. The burglar ran into the alley and climbed up the fire escape. Up the fire escape. In the summer, we will go to the lake again. Now, look at how the first sentence can be broken down into phrases. So the example, I gave it to the woman who is sitting over there. Here are the individual phrases that Professor Ferris points out for us. I gave it to the woman. It to the woman who is sitting over there is sitting over there. Now choose two of the remaining sentences and try to identify all of the phrases within each sentence. And we're going to practice this together. So if you're looking at these sentences going, what is happening? It's all good. It's all good. But I do want you to take a moment, pause the video here, see what you can do on your own. Okay? See what you can do on your own. Great. So we're going to continue here on page 46. So understanding the structure of phrases. Now, all phrases have the same general structure. There is a head of the phrase, which is simply the word whose part of speech names the phrase. And again, we talked about this already at some point, very likely. If you have a prepositional phrase, then the head of that phrase is a preposition. If you have a noun phrase, the head of that noun phrase is a noun. If you have a verbal, okay, we know, right? So the type of phrase is going to be named for the part of speech that heads that phrase. Now, for example, in a noun phrase, the head is a noun. Besides the head, a phrase may have modifiers, which are elements that further describe the head. For instance, in the noun phrase, the little boy, the head is the noun boy, and the modifiers are the article the and the adjective little. Now, all phrases have heads, but not all phrases have modifiers. A noun phrase can be a noun or pronoun alone, and a verb phrase can be a verb alone, as in the short but complete sentence, he ran. However, adjective phrases, adverb phrases, and prepositional phrases all have modifiers in addition to their heads. So again, good information to remember, you guys. Adjective phrases, adverb phrases, prepositional phrases must have modifiers. That means they've got to be more than one word, right? A noun phrase can just be one noun, he. A verb phrase can just be one verb, ran. So that's all Professor Ferris is pointing out to us here. Now, recognize types of phrases. There are 5 major types of phrases found within sentences in English. Not every sentence, of course, will have all 5 types. So, a noun phrase. A noun phrase can be a noun or pronoun alone with modifiers, articles, adjectives, so on. So, Bill, he, my parents, the Smiths, Smith's a last name, that old teacher, my big yellow dog, the man in the moon. Verb phrases. A verb phrase can be a verb alone or with modifiers like auxiliaries, adverbs, so on. So for example, ran, ran away, ran quickly through the park, ate his dinner, seems very tired. Adjective phrases. So one or more adjectives with or without modifiers, intensifiers, such as really, make an adjective phrase. Adjective phrases can be found within larger noun phrases or following linking verbs. So the big yellow dog, right? Professor Ferris already showed us the big yellow dog is a noun phrase over here as well. But inside of that noun phrase, we have big yellow, right? This is the adjective phrase inside of the noun phrase. The teacher seems very angry. Angry is an adjective. It comes after the linking verb seems. It's got a modifier, so these two words together are the adjective phrase. Then we have adverb phrases. An adverb phrase is an adverb plus an intensifier. An adverb phrase can be found in several places within the sentence. So let's look at these examples. So the cat crept very slowly toward the bird. Very slowly, the cat crept toward the bird. The cat very slowly crept toward the bird. The cat crept toward the bird very slowly. And crept is past tense of this verb creep. If you don't know it, creep means walk slowly, right? Don't worry too much about these adverb phrases right now. We'll get more practice with them later, but the most important thing to notice is that they move around the sentence, right? Adverbs usually are easy to identify because they often end in ly, and that's great, but they can move. They can go at the beginning, at the end, in the middle of the sentence, and that can sometimes be tricky. Then we've got prepositional phrases. So a preposition followed by a noun phrase, known as the object of the preposition, makes a prepositional phrase. Like adverb phrases, prepositional phrases can occur in many different places within a sentence. So for example, in the summer, the weather is hot and dry. The weather in the summer is hot and dry. I plan to visit there in the summer when it's not raining. The best time to visit is in the summer. So you can see these prepositional phrases moving around, and if you're going, okay, Jeff, where do I put them? That's fine. But for now, I really want you to focus on preposition, then the noun phrase that is the object of the preposition. That's the most important thing to notice right now. Great. Now, we're here on page 48. So we're going to continue on to how to identify these clauses, right? So hopefully those pages made sense. If they don't, and you're still confused about how to understand, what type of phrase something is, what a head is, pause it, go back, reread those pages, then come back when you're ready. But if you're ready, we're going to continue on to identifying clauses, because clauses are made up of phrases. So a clause is a group of related words that include a subject and a verb, and I can't say this enough. Again, you probably already know this, but if you don't, I'll say it 100 times if we need to. A clause is a subject and a verb. A clause is a subject and a verb. Notice that that's very, very different than a phrase. A prepositional phrase is a preposition and a noun. You don't even need a verb, right? So remember, clauses gotta have a subject, noun phrase, gotta have a verb, verb phrase. So you may be thinking that this is also the definition of a sentence, and you would be right. However, because there are different types and subtypes, means sort of types underneath types, right? That's kind of what subtypes are. Subtypes of clauses, and each subtype affects how a sentence is put together. It is necessary to talk about clauses as separate entities within sentences. So the two most basic types of clauses are independent and dependent clauses. Now, independent clauses have a subject and a verb, and they can stand alone as sentences. They're called independent because they do not need to be attached to another sentence or a sentence part to be meaningful or logical. So here's an example of an independent clause. I ate 3 pizzas. This independent clause passes the test. It has a subject, I, and a verb, ate, and it stands alone logically as a sentence. However, what happens to this sentence if we add the word because? Because I ate 3 pizzas. Now, tutorial 1 explained that because is a subordinating conjunction, and when a clause begins with a subordinating conjunction, it is no longer independent. Instead, it is a dependent clause because it depends on being connected with other information to make it logical. And here she'll give us an example of how to make this a complete sentence. Because I ate 3 pizzas, I was sick all night. Makes sense. Now, subordinating conjunctions are sometimes called dependent words because when they're added to a clause, they make that clause dependent. Now, you will also see dependent clauses referred to as subordinate clauses. The following chart lists some of the most common subordinating conjunctions in English. The subordinating conjunctions include single word subordinators like because and phrasal subordinators like so that. Let's look at the list together, but the most important thing I just want to explain is I use this word subordinator a lot because as Professor Ferris notes, there's a lot of different terms and words that we can use to describe this, and some are conjunctions, some might not be. So really, I think I like subordinator because it talks about the function. It really emphasizes the function, what that word is doing in the given sentence. So if you hear me talk about subordinators, what I want you to think immediately is dependent clause, right? That's how I use this word. So subordinating conjunctions or subordinators include after, although, as if, as though, because, before, even if, even though, if, if only, rather than, since, that, though, unless, until or till, when, whenever, where, whereas, wherever, whether, which, while. Now, some of these words on the list are used as different parts of speech in other sentences. I'm just going to highlight this because remember, context is everything. So just because you see a common word here like that, that doesn't mean that that is always a subordinator. We talked about this and that a little bit. We'll continue to talk about it more, very likely. All I want to say is you see this and that a lot. But just because you see the word that, it doesn't mean that it's always acting like a subordinator. Just keep that in mind. So time markers such as before, after, and since can also be used as prepositions, heading prepositional phrases. So I haven't seen him once since July. There's the noun phrase. After Tuesday, noun phrase, you can deposit the check. Also, which and that can be used as relative pronouns, subjects of a special type of dependent clause discussed later in this tutorial. In short, while the list in the chart is useful, simply memorizing it will not ensure that you analyze sentences correctly. You will have to examine subordinators and clauses in their immediate sentence context, right? And by now you all probably already know this. Context, 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 context. That's the way grammar really starts to make sense, in context. Now, things to think about, be aware about, right? So be aware of specific types of dependent clauses. So after you've identified, is this an independent clause or a dependent clause? If you can identify that it is a dependent clause, again, you need to start thinking, okay, what's this clause doing in this sentence? What's its function, right? So here on page 50, Professor Ferris points out, beyond the main distinction between dependent and independent clauses, there are several specific types of dependent clauses. This tutorial asks you to label them, but it is knowing how to use them that will help you create complex sentences. Such sentences can add coherence, variety, and flair to your writing style. For more about coherence and variety, see tutorial 5 and see tutorial 6. Overusing dependent clauses, though, can lead to wordy, muddy writing. For help with wordy sentences, see tutorial 10. Okay, so noun clauses. Like noun phrases, noun clauses can function as subjects, direct and indirect objects of verbs, and objects of prepositions. So as a dependent clause, a noun phrase cannot stand alone. It is always connected to another clause. Noun clauses begin with subordinators such as that, which, who or whom, whose, when, where, whether, why, how, whatever, wherever, who, whomever, or whichever. So go over that list. I know I said it quickly. Both of the following examples include dependent noun clauses. Each highlighted noun clause contains a subject and a verb, both underlined, begins with a subordinator, italicized, and cannot stand alone as a sentence. That she still wants to marry him is incredible. I don't know why you said that. In the first example, the noun clause is in the subject position. In the second example, the noun clause functions as the direct object. And we'll get more practice with this. But again, if this is confusing or you don't understand what you just read, again, pause it, reread it, write down a question to email or to bring to one of our online meetings, and we can talk about it later. But still, go slow, think about it, okay? Next, we've got relative or adjective clauses. So a relative clause is a special type of dependent clause in which the subject noun phrase is a relative pronoun, so who, whom, which, or that, referring to another related noun phrase in the same sentence. It's therefore considered an adjective clause because its function is to describe a noun phrase. So the professor who is over there teaches biology. Who is over there is the relative clause, because it describes the professor. We know that this sentence has two clauses because it has two verbs, is and teaches. The main clause, the professor teaches biology, has a relative clause embedded or inside of it. The relative pronoun who refers to the subject noun phrase the professor. The entire relative clause, who is over there, describes the main subject, the professor. To look at it another way, a relative clause allows you to connect two smaller related sentences. So here are the two example sentences. The professor is over there. The professor teaches biology. Professor Ferris turns it into the professor who is over there teaches biology. So instead of these two sentences, we put them together to make one sentence. So hopefully you can see that combining two sentences by creating a relative clause is a way to avoid choppy, repetitive writing style. Then we've got adverb clauses. So like adverbs alone, adverb clauses can describe verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs. They can begin with various subordinating conjunctions and usually answer questions such as how, where, and why. In the following examples, the adverb clause is highlighted, subordinating conjunctions are italicized, and the subjects and verbs of the clause are underlined. So, I was sick all night because I ate 3 pizzas. Because I ate 3 pizzas, I was sick all night. He ran 2 minutes faster than he had gone in his last marathon. Thanks to these different types of phrases and clauses, we have a variety of tools for developing an engaging writing style. Great, so we're going to continue and look at practice 2 here. Now again, if anything we just covered seems strange or confusing, go back, pause, reread. Okay, practice 2. For each of the following sentences, complete the 3 steps below. 1. Analyze how many clauses they are. Start by underlining the verbs. Then, for any sentence that has more than one clause, identify which clauses are independent and which are dependent. For the dependent clauses you've identified, see if you can determine the clause type, noun, relative, or adverb. So here's, for example, I saw the little boy with his dog. Analysis, this is one independent clause. And here's her explanation. The little boy who had lost his dog wondered where his dog could be. Oh, I'm sorry. So these are 2 different examples. Forgive me, you guys. So I saw the little boy with his dog, one independent clause. I is the subject, saw is the verb, and then the little boy with his dog is all serving like the object noun phrase. It's the thing that I saw. Now, the little boy who had lost his dog wondered where the dog could be. Analysis. There are 3 clauses, 1 independent and 2 dependent. So the independent clause is the little boy wondered. The dependent clause number 1 is who had lost his dog. That's a relative clause describing the boy. And the second dependent clause is where the dog could be. It's an adverb clause talking or modifying, affecting the verb wondered, right? So the first example, says, in July, we expect to go on vacation, even though we don't know where the money will come from, right? I've sort of taken some notes that you can see here. So see if you agree or disagree with my early analysis. See if you can go through these 5 sentences and come up with your own responses. And be ready to bring any questions you have to an email or to one of our Zoom meetings. So again, take a moment, pause the video, try to do practice 2. All right, welcome back. We're going to continue here on to page 53. We are almost done with this tutorial. So we've talked about phrases. We talked about clauses. Now we're going to talk about sentences. So recognizing sentence types. As you can see from the earlier sections in this tutorial, you can put sentences together in different ways using various phrases and clauses. In this final section, we introduce you to the 4 most basic sentence types in English. So first, a simple sentence. A simple sentence is one independent clause. The one independent clause of a simple sentence may also include various phrase types modifying the main subject and verb phrases. So, Joe slept, simple sentence. The cat saw the bird, simple sentence. Creeping stealthily, the cat came up behind the bird, simple sentence. Although the first and second sentences look less complicated than the third, these are all simple sentences because they contain only one verb and therefore one clause. So here's a more detailed analysis of those 3 simple sentences. In these examples, Professor Ferris has the subject noun phrase underlined and the verb phrase italicized. So Joe, subject noun phrase, slept, verb phrase. The cat, subject noun phrase, saw, verb, and the whole saw the bird is the whole verb phrase, right? Creeping stealthily, the cat came up behind the bird, subject, verb. All right, a compound sentence. Now, a compound sentence has two or more independent clauses connected by a coordinating conjunction. Here's where your fanboys comes in. So the words and, but, or, for, nor, yet, and so are coordinating conjunctions. In all but the shortest sentences, there's usually a comma before the coordinating conjunction. This is an important comma rule that we will practice as well. So he ran home, comma, but he couldn't find his wallet anywhere. This example fits the definition. It has two clauses, two verbs, ran and find, joined by a coordinated conjunction, but, and each clause could stand alone as a sentence. He ran home, period. He couldn't find his wallet anywhere, period. Now, a complex sentence includes two or more clauses. Now, one of the two clauses in a complex sentence is independent. The other clause or clauses are dependent, beginning with a subordinating conjunction. See, I highlighted everything in this sentence because it's so important. Now, in the following examples, the independent main clause is underlined and the dependent clause is bracketed. So, I went to work, although I had the flu. Dependent, although I had the flu. Independent, I went to work. Or we can change the order. Although I had the flu, comma, I went to work. Same sentence, we just change the order of the clauses. Then we have, in the winter, I always vacation in Arizona because I can't stand the cold weather. Independent starts, in the winter, I always vacation in Arizona, and then the dependent clause, because I can't stand the cold weather. Now, note from these examples that either the independent clause or the dependent clause can come first without changing the meaning of the sentence, but the order does change the punctuation. When the dependent clause precedes, comes before the independent clause, as in the second example, a comma follows the dependent clause. That's this example here. Now, a complex compound sentence. A complex compound sentence includes an independent clause joined to another one with a coordinated conjunction, just like a compound sentence. Now, at least one of the independent clauses is also attached to a dependent clause, just like a complex sentence. Here are some examples. The independent clauses are underlined, and the dependent clauses are bracketed. The coordinating conjunctions are bold, and the subordinating conjunctions are in italics. So, I went to work today, but I came home early because I have the flu. Independent, coordinating conjunction, independent, subordinator, dependent clause, right? Much longer sentence now. Although many students preferred to study in the library, I always liked going to a local coffee shop instead, comma, and I could have a triple latte when I got sleepy. Now, if you take a look at a college-level textbook or an academic journal article and analyze a few of the paragraphs, you will notice many complex compound sentences. Again, note that the order of the clauses, dependent or independent, can change. Also, in the second sentence, you can see that the two independent clauses on either side of the coordinating conjunction and are complex. The structure of sentences influences their internal punctuation. This is a big rule. So, we won't get perfect with this in one semester, everybody. Let's be honest. But the sooner you start to understand the relationship between the clauses and punctuation, it will really help you. Even just understand that that is true. Know that, know that, know that. I think often students feel like they're just guessing where to put commas or periods. But again, when you start to see and understand how phrases make clauses and clauses come together to make sentences, you will start to understand where the punctuation goes much better. So here's some basic sort of rules for that punctuation stuff. If the sentence has a dependent clause followed by an independent clause, a comma separates the clauses. That's like this example here. Now, if the independent clause precedes the dependent clause, there is no punctuation between them. That's like this first example here on page 54. With both compound and complex compound sentences, a comma is inserted before the coordinating conjunction. This is another important comma rule. If the clauses are short and closely connected in meaning, the comma may be omitted. However, it's never wrong to insert a comma in these types of sentences. All right. We're going to move on to page 56. The final activity here says apply, and we'll talk about this activity, but again, I'll read through it as we finish up with this tutorial. So page 56 says, take a piece of writing you're working on or have completed recently. Select at least 2 good-sized paragraphs, maybe 200 or 300 words each, and number your sentences. Then analyze your phrase, clause, and sentence type usage. So sentence types: simple, compound, complex sentence, complex compound sentence. Notice if you have any prepositional phrases, any adjective phrases, or any adverb phrases attached to noun phrases or verb phrases in each sentence, and how many of each. Now, you might find the following chart to record your findings really helpful. So the example they're imagining is this sentence: I'm traveling to Canada with my children, but first I'm going to Yosemite with my mother and my siblings. So here we've imagined that this is sentence number 6, right? This is here. So we're saying how many clauses in this sentence? 2. What type of sentence? It's a compound sentence. And what type of phrases? Well, we've got prepositional phrases. We've got to Canada with my children and to Yosemite with my mother and siblings, right? And we could do a really deep analysis on even one sentence. You could do a pretty deep analysis on the types of phrases that you see in a sentence. So again, don't worry too much about understanding every phrase of every clause of every sentence in a paragraph. The goal is not to be perfect right away. It's to start to see how these things come together, right? So try this with your own writing. It's really, really helpful. And then you can examine your chart, look at your chart, and consider the following questions. 1, would you say this analysis reflects what you typically write? Do you use a different writing style for different types of writing? 2, is your writing wordy? Are your sentences too long or too short? Are they choppy? Does your analysis confirm how you viewed your own writing, or does it change those views? And 3, does your analysis suggest any problems with your sentence construction and style that you might want to work on? If so, what are those problems? And we're going to finish up here on page 58. So to wrap up, to finish up what you have learned, what we've talked about. So hopefully now you feel more comfortable identifying the structure and functions of various types of phrases: noun phrases, verb phrases, adjective phrases, adverb phrases, and prepositional phrases. You can identify and correctly use independent and dependent clauses, and you understand the differences among and uses of various sentence types: simple, compound, complex, complex compound. Next steps, so this is again, if you are interested in one of these topics and you want to get more information about it, Professor Ferris will tell you where that information lives in her book. So if you want to analyze your sentence type choices to improve coherence and cohesion, you can see tutorial 5. And to create a more interesting sentence style, you can see tutorial 7. If you want to apply your knowledge about phrase, clause, and sentence types to avoid wordiness, you can see tutorial 10. If you want to practice punctuation errors, that's tutorial 15 and 17, and we will talk about commas eventually. And finally, you can learn about avoiding sentence boundary errors such as run-ons and fragments in tutorial 21. So thank you for going through tutorial 3 with me. I hope that you found it useful to read through this together. Again, the things that you don't understand, reread, re-listen, re-watch me talking about this. Write down your questions, send me an email, send me a text, bring them to our Zoom meetings. Be ready to talk about the specific things that are confusing so that hopefully we can make them more clear when we have more time to go through them together. So thank you for watching this video, and I cannot wait to see you all soon. Bye, everybody.